Imagine what we could do if for child care. In a city like Philadelphia, New York, the big city, Chicago, cost you $12,000 to $14,000 a month for child care.
$14,000 a month for child care? This inflation is out of control. This is Joe Biden. On Friday, June 10th, Biden went to New Mexico to be briefed on multiple wildfires, including the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fires that converged to create the largest and most destructive wildfire in New Mexico's history. Those fires, both of which started back in the beginning of April and have yet to be contained, were the result of botched controlled burns by the U.S. Forestry Service. With that said, it's a very serious subject which deserves serious leadership. But instead, New Mexico got Joe Biden.
Gov, how we doing this thing? You start first or me?
I start first.
That's your state. You better.
All right, are we ready, everyone?
So one of two things happened here. A, whoever organized this briefing failed to tell Joe Biden how the event was going to work, or B, they did, and he forgot what they told him. Either way, it makes him look unprepared and confused. I mean, when it comes to Joe Biden, that's par for the course, I guess, but it's certainly not helping. Anyway, while Governor Lujan Grisham talked about the response, Joe Biden fidgeted like a child until it was his turn to speak.
One, to welcome everybody here today, the men and women that you see around the table, on behalf of the people of this great state. Grateful for the investments that you continue to make. I know that our land and our people are bound together. Our families, it's really more than all of that work that we must do together. That just went up in smoke. It's the thousands who were forced to evacuations past, larger fires, stronger and more frequent hurricanes and flooding on a scale never seen before. It, like this fire, was caused by a controlled burn.
I'm not sure if he's bored or just doesn't want to be there, but I can tell you this for certain. While Joe Biden is there to talk about the wildfires, he'd rather talk about himself.
Well, Governor, thank you very much. Before I begin, we're on National Guard property. I just want to say that National Guard obviously is controlled by the governor, except when federalized. And I have federalized you a number of times nationwide to fight fires, to fight every disaster we've had.
Okay, so far so good, right? Well, not so fast.
And my son was a major in the National Guard.
There it is. Every single chance Joe Biden gets, he mentions his son, Beau. And you can be proud of a family member, that's fine. But there's a time and place for it, and this is neither.
My son was a major in the National Guard, and I think the people don't quite understand the extent of the work you do and the risk you take for us.
And I'm not trying to belittle anyone's military service, but to compare Major Beau Biden's legal work to dangerous firefighting is stupid. Anyway, as I mentioned before, the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fires were essentially the fault of the U.S. Forestry Service. So the main reason the resident is there is to talk about how the federal government is going to take responsibility and provide federal assistance and cover all the costs.
I grew up in a neighborhood called Claymont, Delaware, when we moved from Scranton when Cole died. We moved down to this little steel town, and I went to a little Catholic school across from the fire department, the fire station. And everybody I grew up with, you either became a cop, a firefighter, or a priest. I wasn't qualified for any of them, so here I am.
And he's not qualified to be in the White House, but here we are.
But, you know, just so you know, I've done too many individual and mass funerals for firefighters and the hot shots.
So Biden, speaking to a room of firefighters, says, "I've been to a lot of firefighter funerals." Very inspiring remarks, Joe. So the Hermit's Peak and Calf Canyon fires have been devastating, and to date have burned over 335,000 acres. But Joe Biden would rather make an anecdote about his house in Delaware.
And my fire department saved my life, literally, not figuratively. My house got struck by lightning and mostly burned down, had to be rebuilt.
So right now in New Mexico, Thousands of people have lost their homes and businesses and their belongings, all due to these terrible wildfires. And Biden's like, but I had a fire too.
Saved, the smoke was so thick, Gov. It was literally that thick.
That's what she said.
And you couldn't see through the windows or out the windows. And the floors were collapsing. These guys went in and did two things. Mostly importantly, got my wife out. I was in Washington when it happened.
Wait, he's describing how he couldn't see through the thick smoke, but then says he wasn't even there?
My fire department saved my life, literally, not figuratively.
But equally important, almost not equally, but important. I have a 67 Corvette they got out.
Seems pretty f***ing insensitive to be telling jokes about firefighters saving his precious car amid the largest wildfire on record in New Mexico that the government started. And to add insult to injury, Joe Biden is lying about the fire. I know you're shocked. According to reporting by the Associated Press, back in 2004, lightning struck the home of Senator Joseph Biden, starting a small fire that was contained to the kitchen. Firefighters arrived to find heavy smoke coming from the house, but were able to keep the flames from spreading beyond the kitchen, said Cranston Heights Fire Company Chief George Lamborn. Luckily, we got it pretty early, the chief said. The fire was under control in 20 minutes. So Biden claims he loves firefighters, yet is doing them a disservice by lying and saying that his house mostly burned down when firefighters saved his house by containing the fire to the kitchen.
My house got struck by lightning, mostly burned down.
Okay, so I brought up the house fire story for a reason. Because Joe Biden is a congenital liar, and there is nothing he won't lie about. For example, while performing his side duties as the mayor of Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, Biden told Americans that financially, they're just fine.
A recent survey from the Federal Reserve found that more Americans feel financially comfortable than any time since the survey began in 2013.
This is absolute bullshit. And I will explain why. Biden is referring to an annual survey that was conducted by the Federal Reserve during the fourth quarter of 2021, i.e. last year, and that survey contains the following question. Overall, which one of the following best describes how well you are managing financially these days? The results showed that 78% of respondents either reported that they were doing okay or living comfortably, compared to 75% of respondents polled during the previous 3 years under Trump. Seems high all around, but okay. So Biden is using these results to somehow quantify his claim that there's a strong economy. But this survey was conducted more than 6 months ago, before the war in Ukraine, before the national average of a gallon of gas was $5, before 40-year high inflation, and before a baby formula shortage. So I posed the same question on Twitter and on my channel's community page, and found that less than 55% of my viewers were financially comfortable. But keep trying to gaslight us, Joe. Gonna work out great for you in November.
Let's compare the facts. Under my predecessor, the deficit exploded, rising every single year.
Okay, so that we're all on the same page. A deficit occurs when the government spends more money than it collects in taxes. And while Biden loves to point out that spending exploded under Trump, well, that's because Trump was dealing with a global pandemic. But what Biden is conveniently leaving out is the fact that his former boss, Barack Obama, was the first president to have a budget deficit of over $1 trillion, and he did it for 4 years in a row. Thanks, Obama.
The deficit exploded, and all the benefit going to the top 1%, basically.
So for years, Biden and the Democrats have claimed that Trump's policies, including the Trump tax cuts, only benefited the top 1%, which is a lie, of course. According to IRS data, the Trump tax cuts actually benefited middle-class and working-class Americans in a big way. And Biden has been called out on this before by the Washington Post's fact-checker, who gave Biden 4 Pinocchios. That's how big of a lie it is. And of course, the biggest reason for the deficit under Trump was the CARES Act, a $2.2 trillion economic stimulus bill that provided direct emergency relief to American workers and families and allowed small businesses to meet their payroll. You know, the top 1%.
Last year, we cut the deficit by $350 billion.
Okay, so this is such bullshit. He didn't cut anything. In 2020, the federal deficit under President Trump was a massive $3.1 trillion. The next year under Biden, the deficit was nearly $2.8 trillion. So when Biden claims that he cut the deficit by $350 billion, it just means that less was spent in 2021 than in 2020. And it's not for lack of trying, because in 2021, Biden signed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan and the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. And economists warned that these two bills were not only unnecessary, but would ultimately help drive up inflation, which did in fact happen. Not that Biden will ever admit it.
I don't want to hear any more of these lies about reckless spending. We're changing people's lives.
40-year high inflation, a shrinking GDP, record high gas prices, and Wall Street in bear market territory. Yeah, Joe, you're changing people's lives all right.
Changing people's lives.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Destroying the economy is one thing, but using gendered language, that's where I draw the line.
This year, by the end of the fiscal year, we will have cut the federal deficit by another $1.6 trillion in 1 year. 1 year.
Okay, so technically the deficit will probably be lower than last year. But it's not because Joe Biden suddenly wants to be fiscally responsible. Quite the contrary. It's because the Senate won't pass Biden's Build Back Better bill, which would add at least $1.75 trillion in spending to the 2022 deficit. In other words, if Biden got his wish and Build Back Better actually got through Congress, you wouldn't hear another word about deficits. No, sir. At least not from the Democrats.
Since I took office with your help, families are carrying less debt nationwide.
Fact check false. According to a February 2022 report from the New York Federal Reserve, U.S. household debt increased by $1 trillion in 2021.
There have more savings nationwide.
And that's not true either. From the time Biden took office in January 2021 to the end of May 2022, the average amount of personal savings dropped by 15%.
Under my plan for the economy, we made extraordinary progress. And we put America in a position to tackle a worldwide problem that's worse everywhere but here: inflation.
Biden is claiming with a straight face that inflation is worse everywhere but the United States. And in case you think it was a gaffe, he said it again 2 days later.
Tackling inflation is my #1 priority. Inflation, there's no solace as inflation is higher around the rest of the world, and gas prices are higher everywhere else in the world.
So Biden is very wrong. The US has higher inflation than 14 of our G20 counterparts. And worldwide, there are currently 105 countries with lower inflation than the US. In other words, Joe Biden is living in fucking fantasy land. And when Peter Doocy from Fox News asked his press secretary about it, you just have to watch this.
Why is the president saying that inflation is worse everywhere but here?
Because what we have seen across the globe, first of all, inflation is a global challenge, as we have said. It is caused by clearly the pandemic, this once-in-a-generation pandemic that we are coming out of, and also most recently the war that Putin started in Ukraine that has caused inflation as we look at food and as we look at gas prices.
So the question was, why is Biden saying that inflation is worse everywhere but in America? And Karine Jean-Pierre's answer was, inflation is a global challenge. Wait, what?
He says that inflation is worse everywhere but here. That's not true. The U.S. has worse inflation than Germany, France, Japan, Canada, India, Italy, Saudi Arabia.
Well,
so why is he saying that?
I think what we are saying is that when you talk about inflation, it is a global thing. And it is not just about the United States. This is something that everyone is feeling because of coming out of a once in a lifetime pandemic, because of the war that Russia has started in Ukraine.
And you thought that Jen Psaki was terrible at her job. Wow. Anyway, I think that's a good place to end it. Be sure to hit that like button, check out these videos that you might have missed, and be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel. As always, I hope to see you next time, if there is a next time.